Well, listen, good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to see each of you. I've met many of you, but probably not all. But I am grateful for your time today and joining what is the first town hall on curriculum renewal, which we focused this town hall on the working group members of phase one, as well as some of our curriculum renewal leadership team members. So welcome. It's really a privilege to have you here. Next slide, please. So this is the purpose, is not only just to welcome you, but so here's the kind of things that I thought we could potentially do today is, and I certainly don't want to talk at you for like 50 minutes and then say any questions, is to try and have as much of a dialogue around phase one and as we are thinking about plans for phase two. So I'll just provide just a very quick overview of curriculum renewal goals, where we are on the timeline, a little bit around an update on phase one. I know you received as part of your invitation the synthesis report that was considered by both the Curriculum Content Review Committee as well as the undergraduate curriculum committee. So I'll share that with you, and then hopefully we'll pause for a bit and see if you have any questions or comments about any of that. And then we'll share plans for how phase two is started, but really we're mostly interested in engaging in a dialogue with you. I want to hear from you about some of your reflections on the process that you experienced, some of any comments or concerns or ideas that you would have. And then at the very end, I'd just like to, again, formally thank you for your participation in curriculum renewal in phase one. Next slide. So as you remember, the primary objective of curriculum renewal, which was not my idea when we started the curriculum renewal project, I was a little more focused on other goals, was we went back to sort of square one, which is trying to define what are the characteristics, the qualities, and the professional values and abilities that would actually define the graduates of our Faculty of Medicine's MD program at the University of Ottawa. And then to think with that vision in mind, define what the curriculum's content should be and the design of it and the assessment strategies that we should be using collectively to achieve, that ultimate goal. So that was our primary objective. Next slide, please. And to do that, we created a project timeline that started with creating a leadership team, and then we centered on a staged implementation plan, and each of you were important members of helping us to identify what should the strategic directions for curriculum renewal, what should they be? And then, so that took us up until the summer of this year. And the subsequent phases 2 and 3 will be around designing the plan and then implementing it certainly over the next 2 years. And then thinking about an ongoing program evaluation strategy that's about continuous improvement from the fall of 2024 and beyond. So we are still fairly early in this overall timeline. Next slide. So if I look back at phase one with you, the key focus, at least as I had thought about it, was identifying what are those strategic priorities for curriculum renewal, and these were the working groups that were formed to help us deliberate and to think about, what those strategic priorities might center on in terms of areas of social accountability, interprofessional education, patient partnerships, etc. The anti-racism working group, which had started to form prior to September 2020, was another working group that was ongoing throughout the same time as phase one with the working groups that you were all members of. But so there were these 8 groups, and they each produced an important report that we have all read and considered. And if you need access to all of these, we will certainly provide a mechanism to do so. Next slide. So I think the great thing for me was there were 86 members across the 7 working groups anti-racism would have added to that. And this was the distribution of the kinds of people that were part of those working groups. And I think that was terrific, that we had 7 patients, 18 medical students, 31 of our clinical faculty, 11 PhD faculty, 11 of our administrative staff, and from a social accountability perspective, 8 community organizations certainly participated in sharing their thoughts about the engagement of communities, organizations with that are receiving medical students within those organizations as part of community service learning. These groups generated like 95 pages of text, 114 recommendations for change, supported by 154 references. So a very well thought through, well referenced set of recommendations for change to our curriculum. So thanks for your participation in that. And here were some of the kind of key outcomes, I think, of phase one. We actually created that vision of a graduate of the U Ottawa's MD program, but also from an interprofessional education working group perspective, what a U Ottawa interprofessional medical practitioner would be defined as. We defined a philosophy and a purpose for what we think the curriculum's educational mission should be. And I think there was a very considered response to evolving patient, community, and societal health needs, not just simply trying to address our accreditation expectations as a faculty of medicine. Really important, I think, goals that we achieved through phase one. Next slide. So this is, in like one slide, if I could try to do it, is what is the compelling future vision for curriculum that we focused on? We tried to articulate that in the synthesis report, but I think it's about a curriculum that's integrated, and not just in the first 2 years, but across all 4 years. It's a curriculum that's going to be competency-based, but reflecting a culture of social accountability and demonstrating an effective partnership with patients and the community organizations that we have the privilege of working with. It will be technology enabled, and the pandemic certainly taught us a lot about how do we shift from face-to-face learning, to an online environment. And we stumbled a bit, in the first year or so of that, but I think we're getting a little bit better. But something that where technology is not just the delivery mechanism for how we think about curriculum, but is making it come alive, often through a lot of AI applications, video, and a whole series of multimedia. Next slide. And we tried to then summarize that wealth of wisdom that came out of the 7 working group reports into a synthesis report, which you received, that demonstrated these 3 strategic priorities. That it would be competency-based, which is that focus on the implementation of how the entrustable professional activities will be integrated within both curriculum and assessments. Again, the integration of the curriculum, both horizontally, within defined periods of time, and vertically over time, and especially across disciplines. I think I learned a lot from the reviewing of the literature, that this isn't just about co-locating activities together, that makes some sense to a particular week, but it's a different way of approaching how we plan and implement curriculum together across disciplines and across time slots. And the third big priority was enhancing the role of patients as strategic partners for our curriculum. And I know there were 76 roles that the IPE working group identified, but I just picked the 3 that I think are the ones we will likely be able to start quickly with, which is the role of patients as teachers, as assessors, and as curriculum planners within our structure. Next. Some people say, well, what's an image of this? I picked 2. One is a fairly simple image of a spiral curriculum, where concepts that are exposed, that we expose students to, in the first set of weeks or months of the curriculum, is then reinforced in increasing sort of spirals that become either more clinically relevant or in more complex situations. So I picked the one on the left, but it might be more like the DNA, where we have multiple integrated curricula. So in areas of the longitudinal curricula that we're connecting to a clinical and basic science integrated base, and thinking about the connections as we go from year to year to year, to make sure that it makes intrinsic sense to our students, that we can have a coherent approach to assessment. So integrated is much on the planning side and making sure that the sequencing and the co-location of activities is thoughtful in way in which we reinforce concepts in their clinical application over each of the years of the program. Thanks. And to do that, to accomplish all of that, we actually identified more enabling strategies than sort of the strategic directions for the curriculum. So every working group created recommendations for faculty development, that we can't do this without supporting our faculty's growth in knowing how, for instance, to teach in particular areas, or to involve patients as educators or assessors within the curriculum, or to figure out how competencies are a way in which we can reorganize and rethink through how curriculum should work. We need a much more greater approach to a longitudinal assessment, more on the for-learning side than the sort of more summative views of assessment. A programmatic assessment plan, those were the two ideas that came out of our assessment working group. And we need to pilot some of these ideas so that we know that we can make them work intrinsically, as we sort of, as we plan out approaches to how we see an integrated curriculum working over time. And we'll also need a robust infrastructure that certainly includes both our technology platform and the tools, but a different structure and a program evaluation model that allows us to know if we're making progress to achieving those outcomes. And maybe as everything moves longitudinally, a different educational administrative structure to support it from our operations team. So a very comprehensive set of enabling strategies to enable us to accomplish movement in each of those three strategic directions. Next slide. So if we can just move to the next one, that would be great. I think we're stuck. Oh, there we go. So that report, we tried to summarize that for you. I authored that with the co-chairs of each of the 7 working groups, and it was considered both at the Curriculum Content Review Committee and at the Undergraduate Curriculum Committee on the dates there. And I am pleased to tell you that both of those groups endorsed our synthesis report, which was then the foundation for moving towards the specific phase 2, which is about planning the change or making the change starting in September 2022. So all of your work and sort of the synthesis of with the co-chairs created, that a level of endorsement, which I was really pleased to achieve. And we wanted to hold this first town hall with you to tell you what had happened, but we needed to get to at least to the end of September before we could really say that phase 1 actually achieved its goals and we're ready to launch phase 2. Next slide. So I guess before we get on to the next sort of section of telling you a little bit about phase 2. Again, I'm not seeing the slide move. Catherine, if you could try and move that forward, that would be great. We just wanted to get your reactions just to the synthesis report itself, the kinds of things that you saw in it, things that you liked about it, and that I know we received at least one question from you, but I'm just going to open it up and just see if people had any comments or questions or issues that they wanted to raise. We have many of the co-chairs here with us today around the synthesis report itself. Carolyn, Catherine, can you move the slides forward, or is that how? We'll try again. We'll launch again. Technology, don't always the way it happens. Okay, here we go. So any thoughts or questions when you read that synthesis report? Were you pleased with it? Were you puzzled by it? Were you concerned about it? This is your time. You can use the chat function if you want to add a comment. I'll open it up just to make sure if people want to do that, but you're certainly free to just open your microphone and ask a question or make a comment. Oh, so thank you, Annie. I thought it was amazing. Other thoughts about, did you find anything there that said, gosh, why wasn't that included in the report, or how did you see that? We tried to use your very specific recommendations as illustrative of those strategic priorities and where we need to go, and try to set it in a context that wasn't so much about meeting accreditation standards, but trying to see curriculum as a response to what we see evolving within our patient populations, our communities, and as part of our social accountability mandate. No, okay. This is going to be a fair, you don't want to hear me drone on forever. No, come on. Although as for some of you who know me, I can fill up any space. I'm wondering whether or not, Annie, do you want me to try and share my screen? Brad, go ahead. Help me out here, buddy.
Actually, sorry, I just want to let you know there's a comment in the chat.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
I'll also share my slides, I think, if Karen's having an issue.
Okay, so thank you, Karen. So Karen said that she was a member of the patient partner working group. I think that group was great. It had, I think, more patient partners than it did docs, which was intentional. That was fantastic. Oh, great. We're at your time for questions. So she says it was apparent that the recommendations connected between working groups. Yes, and it would be nice to see how we might bring the groups together to discuss that. Absolutely. So thank you for that comment. The mechanism we chose, like during phase one, was more about try to use the co-chairs to sort of talk about how things were going, and to find areas of overlap that may have been evolving in terms of, are you guys doing this, or how are you approaching that kind of thing. So I think as we get into the second phase, where we're actually starting to plan the plan, it would be great to see how that's going to continue to evolve. And I have to say, there's likely way more working groups in phase two than there was necessarily in phase one. But yeah, I think it was a credit to having that conversation with the co-chairs, that we had a sort of a synergy of movement together, even though the working groups were working on very different things. That may have certainly, I think, contributed to the cohesion of it. Any other reactions to the synthesis report itself, or areas of concern, maybe? You guys are a quiet group today. It's like, I'm going to interpret quiet as being you're all right with it, but that may be a little dangerous. But oh, good, Matthew, thank you. You've got a comment. Let me just bring it up here. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I hope the co-construction process being kind of well handled. I think that's a tribute to our co-chairs and the way they facilitate that. It was an attempt to really be a conversation among colleagues, and colleagues widely defined, so that it was a distillation of the wisdom of the collective, not of a few of us gray hairs, that maybe thinking this might be a good idea. Michael Wu's got his hand up, I think. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, Craig, thanks very much. It's really exciting, but I have to say, when I shared some of this information with our department, I think a little bit scary as well. I guess the implementation part of it and how that rolls out. So I was happy to see, faculty development, one of the things at the top there in terms of how that will all roll out. But overall, I think really exciting. I think glad to be part of it, but I think a little bit of apprehension about how is this all going to roll out? What are the expectations of faculty and contributions to this, new curriculum? I think is, some of the things that are concerned there.
Totally hear that. That's a legitimate concern. I think. I think it's one of the reasons why I think in 2008, 2009, when we did the last major curriculum renewal project, it was more like flipping a switch. Like we went from the old curriculum to the new curriculum all at once, like entirely. Although depending on the scope of the changes being considered, that's sometimes plausible and thoughtful, but the extent of these changes, like going back to, you know, some grassroots ideas around the purpose and meaning of the curriculum and how it should be expressed, it's going to create, you know, that's why I think a staged implementation, you know, where we're going to try and do this in a thoughtful way over periods of time, and that period of time is like at least over 2 or 3 years, supported by, you know, a system that has an evolution. That's why there were so many of those implementation strategies. FactDev, a technology platform. Like, we're not going to be able to do competence-based education without a robust technology platform, et cetera. So we need way more of that time for people to adjust to new roles and responsibilities. And it has to, you know, and that's why it's going to be, I think, that might be one way to relieve a bit of anxiety, but I get it. Change is always, it's always scary, or can be. But if we have a compelling plan for it, that's the hope, is it will, you know, people are willing, and if they have a chance to build into the change and not just be, you know, be sort of the recipients of it, that will help too, I think. Does that, Michael, does that help a bit?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Craig.
Okay. Other comments about phase one?
Hi, Craig.
Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Hi. Thanks very much. Hello.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for providing this town hall kind of format for people to reflect, and also have a chance to ask questions on the on this very exciting initiative here. It's quite daunting when you start looking at all the recommendations and the fact that there's, you said, what, 146 or so, but I think compared to what was done back in 2008, 2009, this is much more items that are integrated right throughout, as opposed to here's a block of this or a block of that. And I think that will fundamentally shift the experience of what happens within the medical school. The question is, as you said, is how to lay this out in a project management style, right? What needs to be done first before you can start doing the other things successfully, because certain things have to be done to be foundational to support the work that needs to be done to implement other recommendations from specific groups. So still a lot to do.
Yeah, and I've been using the word renewal, and I continue to use it. But you know, I know Simon's here, but you know, I think in truth, this is as much about curriculum reform as it is about curriculum renewal. Yeah, I mean, there will be some renewal aspects, but when you talk about a new structure and taking curricula that kind of been sort of largely focused on the first 2 years and integrating them across all 4 years, and thinking about the role competencies will play, for instance, as an organizing framework of how we think about curriculum and assessment. These are not small changes. This is not like a tweaking of the curriculum. It's really about a rethink of it. And in particular, our social accountability mandate as a faculty, as a university, you know, within rapidly changing times, and how do we prepare our students and faculty for those? So this is reform, and that's why I think it can be a bit scary, and we need both a bit of a top-down and a very much bottom-up embracing of that, and we need to make sure people understand that and have ability to contribute to it if they have the desire to do so. Yeah, transformative. Yeah, I'm not, Garrett, that's a good idea. I'm not sure of what what word is scarier. Maybe transformative is, you know, maybe more, I don't know, developmental than reform, which sounds like we're hammering it over. But yes, it's really you know, a rethink about it from the ground up. So we'll share a little bit about how we thought about the ordering of that change when we get to curriculum renewal in a second. Okay, maybe I'll go on to the next section of this. We can always come back. Appreciate any questions or comments about. So maybe, Brad, can you move ahead to the next slide? Yeah. So phase 2 is really about now we have sort of the strategic directions is how do we actually make the change? And so the official launch for this started on the 4th of October. And we thought about, a set of working groups that would help us to begin the process of redesigning the curriculum structure. And so Dr. Doug Archibald and I are going to co-chair the curriculum redesign working group, and we already have members, and we're starting that. I think our first meeting, I think, is November the 2nd. Excuse me just for a second. Hello, can I call you back? Oh, Anna, I'm sorry, I'm just giving a webinar right now. Can I call you? Okay. Okay. Sorry. So we thought about the curriculum structures that's going. We talked, Dr. Loughnane and I are going to be creating a UGME faculty development working group to create a specific program for faculty. And we're, it's early days, but we're sort of thinking about if a new faculty member came into the university, today, what would we propose is the faculty development program for them, plus role specific faculty development initiatives. Some of these will be for all faculty, some will be more targeted. We have 3 potential working groups focusing on competency-based education and how we're going to implement that starting in 2022. But the lion's share of what I've been doing with several of you is to think about each of the longitudinal curricula, IPE, the SIM longitudinal curriculum, which is society, the individual, and medicine, ethics, anti-racism. We have clinical skills as a longitudinal curriculum, et cetera. There are 8 of these. We are asking them to redesign each of those curricula in an integrated way over each of the 4 years of the curriculum. So we thought those were the groups that we needed to launch first to begin the process. There will be working groups on case-based learning that will occur probably starting in the early part of 2022. And Tim and I are thinking with others around some working groups to take current assessment forms that students receive that are feedback to them from things like case-based learning, from clinical skills, from OSCEs that we have within our curriculum, and trying to start to POCUS, I think would be another one, Michael, for who is leading that with Nicolas Chenot, and try and begin the alignment process towards how that gives feedback to students about various EPAs. So those are the working groups that we have formed to date. We've got several leaders already who have agreed to co-lead those, and we have membership groups there. I have to say I've been emphasizing the importance of thinking thoughtfully about patient partners as a member of each of these working groups. We have certainly recruited a patient partner for the curriculum redesign working group, and so trying to follow through on the recommendations of patients as playing a role in the redesign of the curriculum to see many of these working groups involve patients. Also involve faculty across the spectrum of the first, not just from the first 2 years, but the clinical environment years 3 and 4, and to think strategically about ensuring that our administrative staff, operations team members have a continuing role in contributing to the redesign of the curriculum that they will support. So lots and lots of working groups being formed. The next is just the next phase, and then we can pause. There's only 2 or 3 slides on phase 2. If you go to the next slide, Brad. Yeah, so the whole idea, I think, has been focused along how do we design an integrated longitudinal curriculum across the 4 years. And here are some of the keys to success that we've sort of identified, at least some of us identified. We need to get greater participation across different levels of the curriculum to be successful. So we're trying to recruit, individuals that may not have been part of phase one to certainly be part of phase two. We want some degree of overlap between the two phases for sure, for continuity's purposes. I think we've already achieved that with several of phase one working group members and agreeing to co-chair the next set of working groups. We're trying to build, we have a communication strategy that we think is pretty comprehensive, and a change management strategy where we need to start to communicate that out for sure to ensure that that is understood across the breadth of UGME. We're working with our IT groups around a more robust technical platform, the faculty development training, and trying to get as much buy-in from both the top and the bottom up ideas so that the changes that we're trying to make, that we're trying to do it together, and I hope that the synthesis report will be seen by many as being compelling, to be innovative and informed by the evidence itself. So we asked, so that's where we are. We just started phase two. If we go to the next slide, we just think about your comments or questions. I know some of you have already added some into the chat. So let's pause for that and see if there's anything specifically you have around phase two itself. So Tanya, around that Dr. Katie says her regrets. Yeah, committed to TRC, Action on Indigenous Health. That's going to be certainly, Tanya, if you're still here, that's going to be one of the longitudinal working groups is on Indigenous Health as a longitudinal curriculum separate from others, I think. So that's for sure. Yeah, care diversity patients. We'll do our best. I was reflecting on some of our standardized patients that I've been tutoring in interviewing skills and not as much on physical exam skills, but a lot of those patients look a lot more like me than I think our community as a whole. So that's one of the areas, not just in terms of case-based learning, but within the standardized patient populations of recruiting a very diverse group of patients, that not just based on tone of skin, but across the patient populations that are important to us. So Louise, how are interprofessional competencies going to be included in phase two? Well, thank you for asking. So we have Lena Shapoff and Simon Kitto. Lena, maybe would you mind trying to talk a little bit about how the competency frameworks, it will not likely be at least dominantly CanMEDS, but do you want to share some thoughts about competency framework for IPE?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. Thank you for your question, Louise, and thank you for letting me speak, Craig. So in phase two, we're actually looking at all the recommendations that we did with the working group and maybe using the CIHC 6 key domains in interprofessional education. So not focusing on the typical CanMEDS rules that we often teach our students, but really going with an interprofessional lens in order to create the curriculum that will span all through the 4 years of the program. So we'll be recruiting for that new committee to put into action all of the recommendations that the first working group had provided so far.
Okay. Louise, does that help? Do you want any follow-up questions or comments about that? Dr. Marshall asked about why a race-based working group rather than BIAS working group. Ken, could you sort of, I'm just trying to make sure I understand what BIAS stands for, including sexual orientation, physical, like obesity, bias, etc. Could you sort of expand a little bit on your question for us?
Just the bias, I think, is a much more inclusive term than race bias, and I've cited particularly sexual orientation and physical bias, such as obesity and deformity.
Yeah. So I don't think this is, thank you for that comment. I certainly take that back as as an important sort of thing to reflect more on. I know that around the anti-racism working group came out of our equity, inclusion, and diversity group within faculty affairs. It certainly isn't, as I've talked to Dr. Simpson and the new leadership, our Black Health Lead, it's not about Black health for sure. It's about all races and populations that are affected from a healthcare perspective. So it may include more of this. I'll have to work with that working group around their terms of reference around that. If we need another working group, we can certainly form one within it, but I appreciate your comments and thoughts about that. Sorry, I don't have a more thoughtful answer, but these are the issues that it's great to have, perspectives that we may not have thought of, or considered, in terms of formal working groups. So I appreciate that. Is that helpful, Ken?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Lisa asked about, is there Indigenous involvement in the patient partnership aspect? I absolutely will be. I think as that idea of patient partnership evolves out in terms of who is teaching what, I think certainly Indigenous patients would certainly be part of that. I think one of the goals of forming a patient partnership office, at least as recommended by our patient partnership working group, was to start to think about, the involvement of multiple types of patients across a spectrum, from a recruitment, training, and support of those patients. I don't know if Lynn Ashdown or Jerry Maniette wants to comment a little bit about that aspect that emanated out of their report, but I would certainly see that patient partnership idea as being more inclusive of a whole range of patients than those that just have disease-specific ideas, I would say. Jerry, do you want to start?
Yeah, and maybe I can point to our recommendation number 11, Craig, from our group, that we recommended that building and maintaining a network of diverse patient partners, community organizations was the approach. And it's because that's one of the issues that's often lacking in patient partnerships in places that already have them, is that they're pretty homogeneous, and we realize that our community is not. And so the question or the comment that Lisa put in, as well as Karen and others, I think that's exactly what we're trying to capture. But we couldn't put all the names because it's an ever evolving domain, and so to capture it by the use of the word diverse was our attempt to say that has to be a thoughtful piece.
Yeah, and I'm just going to pause before sort of addressing Simon's comment in the chat. If we go to the next slide, because we did receive one question, and it's sort of important to sort of consider. When you were invited, you had an opportunity to ask a question if you wanted to. We did receive one, which was great, which was how would we rate UGME's organizational readiness for transformational change required to embrace patient partners as teachers? So that was the question we raised. I could certainly provide a perspective on that. I don't know if Lynn or Jerry would want it to chat. Jerry, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. And both Lynn and I have been discussing this. So, and Lynn, by all means, you can jump in as well. But both of us feel that at least our working group and the mandate that we had was not actually to look at organizational readiness for the Faculty of Medicine and specifically UGME. And that's not what we had asked of our members as well in the working group. Our task was to recommend, after we looked at the literature and as we looked at and did our environmental scan and in partnership with our colleagues at University de Montreal, to make recommendations. I think that's where we now need to think is, okay, now that these 11 recommendations from just the patient partnership group have landed on the desk, is our organization as UGME or the Faculty of Medicine are we ready to sort of move? But I think knowing that these recommendations have been approved means now, okay, we're on that journey. So the question is, how do we move from where we are, and what is our current state, which I don't have a very good clear picture of because that's not my role. But perhaps that's part of our next piece, is to say, what is organizational situation right now for this, just like the other working groups will have to, from a technology perspective, where are we? Are we ready to go full into this, or is there work that we need to do? And keep in mind, these are culture change.
Right.
Yeah, Alma, this is not a flipping of a switch, as you said earlier, Craig. This is something fundamentally different, that if we want sustainability and full engagement of faculty and the learners and the community that we're trying to actually serve by doing this work, I think we have to thoughtfully and patiently do this.
Yeah, and Annie's on, who we had a great partnership in this working group, in particular from the University of Montreal, and they may want to comment on, I know, because we relied a lot on their 10-year maybe journey, if not more, on this. Lynn, do you have a specific comment? Ashdown, do you want to comment on this?
Thanks, Craig. Just wanted to kind of echo, I think Jerry already sort of very eloquently captured sort of what the mandate of our working group is, or was. And I think, depending on faculty's readiness, we created a very thorough document that really is a good blueprint, for how to enact this idea of, patient partnerships, and how to do it authentically and safely, and address even, cultural shifts and all of those, different aspects. So, we can't speak to sort of faculty's readiness, but if they are ready, we really gave a very thorough, thoughtful report that is really a good blueprint that would allow us to embrace this this idea, and also to just kind of add, kind of making sure that we focus on the question as well, sort of asking sort of patient partners as teachers, that's kind of, one aspect of the many ways in which patients can be actively involved in curriculum. So it's not just about, engaging patients as teachers, which absolutely is, I think it's reflected in our report that that's critical and part of patient partnership within UGME, but sort of, beyond just patient partners as teachers, sort of as assessors and, curriculum design and all that sort of stuff. So
I think that patients are, at least in a limited way, all engaged as educators today. It's just a matter of how do we thoughtfully expand and build upon that experience, and where would, if we were going to make a beginning in this area, where would it be most likely to be applied and successful, so we can build on experience and share that experience across different contexts, both in the first 2 years, as well as into years 3 and 4. So I think it's hard to actually make a judgment about organizational readiness. At least I have a difficulty, because I'm relatively new myself to UGME. But I do think that there is, if we have a thoughtful plan here, I think our faculty will buy in. Yeah. Simon asked about how to sort of connect what we're doing to residency and CPD around a much more longitudinal program beyond this. And I think that's a really thoughtful thing. I mean, I came out of the CPD world. I've been there for quite a while, and have been involved in residency education. So, I think we're making I think we should try and connect that, Simon, as best we can. I think that's an important concept, which, competency-based education, lifelong learning is certainly, if anything, those are two things that connect the continuum together. It's a learning continuum, as well certainly residency is competency-based. So, how do we're preparing our students to enter competency-based residency programs that, we should be collaborating fairly effectively with PGME. And so there's been some early thoughts about that. Residents certainly can be involved and will likely be invited to be part of many of the working groups. We have a resident advisory committee that we've been trying to develop as part of CCRC that will help also support pre-clerkship and clerkship committees as it are currently constituted. So, and I think the assessment strategies that we can learn from what residency has done well, things that they would like to have done differently. So as we sort of think about the EPA implementation plans and the assessment strategies down the road. So I think that's a really good reminder to keep that continuum together and to think about representation, not just within the UGME group, but across PGME and CPD. Certainly, I think the faculty development stuff will be helpful in sort of making those connections as well, or could be. Just scanning the chat here, which is fantastic. Okay, thank you. So Louise also asked about exploring the value of including family members, social supports for curriculum development. Yeah, I think, there was a lot of strategies around, I think in the EPA world, we used lots more than just from the patient themselves. So I think, yes, we'll think about, we'll have to be sort of thoughtful about how we, how the scope of this, how that should grow over time. Lots of great ideas there to keep in mind.
Craig, I'll just jump in. I had answered it further along in the chat.
Oh,
but,
good. Thank you.
In our report, we do define patient. It's this sort of generic universal term, but it's absolutely inclusive to family, loved one, caregivers, etc. Just for brevity, we use the word patient. So
thank you.
But not forgotten.
Right. And Lisa asked whether the anti-racism working group has been shared with everyone. The answer is probably no. It was just, I just received it sort of about 10 days ago. So it was talked about and discussed and endorsed at CCRC on October 15th. So just shortly ago, 10 days ago. It hasn't been widely disseminated, but certainly it will be. Okay. This is great. Lots of good questions, etc. So I'm glad to see your comments and things. We had a couple of questions for you. We've got about 12 minutes left to go. So maybe we just go to the last slide or so, which is, these were some of the things I thought about. I think we've talked a little bit about the first one, that's fine. Maybe is there, any thoughts you have about things that we should be, the issues or concerns, challenges we're going to be facing as we sort of get into phase 2. And although we have a program evaluation model that's being developed by an advisory group, and we're hoping to form a formal program evaluation subcommittee of CCRC to help us monitor our progress towards implementation of the strategic priorities and the recommendations flowing from each of the working groups. Ideas that you might have about how we would know whether we're making progress, or what would be some of the measures of success that would be helpful to see that we are advancing towards the kind of curriculum that we're sort of aspiring towards over the next several years. So maybe we could just end with comments or discussion about one or more of those before we end at 5 o'clock for sure. Thoughts about phase 2, issues or concerns about it, or things that you'd like us to pay attention to as we start to think about the working groups as they're just starting to think about what the curriculum should be and how it's going to be structured. So it's right at the front end of that. But I appreciate any thoughts or comments or words of wisdom for us as we sort of take on the daunting task of thinking about the specific changes that will be required to implement what phase 1 has articulated. Lynn, did you have your hand up? No, okay, sorry. Thoughts about phase 2? And maybe I'm gonna put you on the spot if I could around, you know, where did the University of Montreal start when they were starting to think about patients as teachers? Did you have a specific area that you started piloting ideas with, and how did that sort of work out for you? Would you be able to share some thoughts from Montreal's experience?
Hi.
Hi, Mathieu. Wonderful. Thanks for joining.
So I guess the first part of the question, it started with a commitment by the dean at the time, Jean Rouleau, who's a cardiologist. He committed a budget and created a first patient partnership office with Vincent Dumez, who was the first patient that was like a part of the university structure. So that was the very first. It started with like an organizational commitment, and then very quickly with this one patient expert that was hired by the faculty. He started doing collaborations and projects with different people. Teachers came up to him, to his office, to say, what could we do to integrate? I would like to integrate patients in my course. It started with lots of testimonies, so maybe less advanced, of course, than what we do now. And then I think the major step that allowed to scale up was that patient partnership was associated with interprofessional collaboration. And so that allowed we have interprofessional collaboration workshops on the 13 healthcare programs. And so that really allowed to expose all students of the 13 healthcare programs to be exposed to patients as trainers. And basically it sort of grew up from there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mathieu. That's very helpful. Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mathieu. I just wanted to add, so as we've seen from collaborating with Université de Montréal, is that where they are now, this has been 10 years in the making, and so we recognize that in our report as well, and that we can't go from where we are now to where Montreal is sort of overnight, but we did give some sort of recommendations as well of very not simpler, but very authentic ways to engage patients from the onset. So we did give, rather than just this is the aspirational where we need to be, we actually gave some very actionable items that could be implemented in the short term as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Great. Any other comments or questions about phase 2? I as people get to know me, they know I like to spend most of my time at 30,000 feet, not on ground level. But this is a ground level phase. We're going to get down to the details here. We know that we have to communicate out a lot more than we've been doing in phase 1. Getting people engaged in that. So, but thoughts about phase 2. I'm sorry, somebody trying to speak? I can't. No. Okay. I'm just looking at. So there's nothing. Sort of no hands up. Is there anything in the chat, Brad, about this? I'm just sorry, pull this up again. Yeah, Ben, I think, well, that's the goal, or at least, or as many of the working groups as we can, to have a patient partnership there. I think that's respectful of engaging them as planners. We're doing some planning now, so we should have patient partnerships, as part of that planning process. That was one of the things I noted for sure in in a number of the Montreal faculty sharing their experiences was to start with the things that you're starting to plan in the future, you know, the new things, as much as the old. So that will be helpful. Lisa, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, I had put my question in the chat. It was,
Ah.
how are members of the working groups for phase 2 being selected?
Okay, so great question. So the goal was for me is to sort of identify the leaders or the co-chairs of the working groups, and for them to do the invitations of those who they would like to invite. Their terms of reference would certainly, you know, are largely reflective of making sure that we've got, you know, broad representation, you know, depending on the nature of the specific working group. So, you know, that's how the working group members will be selected, is primarily from by the co-chairs. But because most of phase 2 is about longitudinal curriculum and, you know, thinking about the curriculum across 4 years, it's not just going back to the same people in phase 1. Certainly that it would be great to have many of those continue in some way, but to expand the population of participants, you know, in phase 2 as part of an engagement strategy for us. So that's how they'll be recruited. And Laura asked around, you know, how will the phase 2 groups integrate their work? Yeah, I think we had a co-chair strategy in phase 1. We may do something similar, especially for the longitudinal working groups, to, you know, to collaborate together around about the things that they're working on and where the particular areas of overlap might be between different groups, because it's not specific silos. So we certainly work on ways to collaborate and communicate across groups, for sure. So working on ways to think about that, that would be helpful to make sure that we have integration in planning, not just, you know, you know, like we did in phase 1, and we'll replicate that in phase 2. Lisa, is that helpful in terms of about the selection? It's sort of guided by terms of reference, but it's the co-chairs that would be given that kind of responsibility, as opposed to telling them that here are your working group members. They actually get to go and recruit them.
Sorry, so do you mean that the co-chair for each of the new working groups will be responsible for selecting a wide variety of individuals?
That's
a representative variety of individuals to participate in each group?
That's correct. Yeah. That's the goal.
Okay, I just want to mention, as long as it's kind of, it's good if it's a transparent process, that information is readily available to everyone regarding, you know, the groups and the compositions of the groups.
Sure. Yeah, we can certainly make the terms of reference are a draft. They're intended to be reviewed, and if there's suggestions for revisions, that's absolutely. But we've also created, you know, for longitudinal curriculum, a bit of a guideline about how they might think about organizing the work, because this is sort of like a 6-month process, you know, for that. And then I think we'll spend probably a better part of the next year thinking about how these can be integrated thoughtfully, you know, within a restructured curriculum. So yeah, I'm relying on the co-chairs in part, at least, to make sure that we have broad representation across, as I think we accomplished for phase 1. Just one thing, Karen raised that the recommendations have been endorsed. I think that's potentially not exactly what I asked CCRC or UCC to do. I asked them to endorse the synthesis report and the strategic and enabling priorities, not the individual recommendations from individual reports. But in the formation of the next wave of working groups, those individual working group reports have certainly been communicated to some where there's alignment. So if we're having an assessment, sort of working group, the assessment working group report, et cetera. So I just don't want to say that all of the recommendations, 114 of them were endorsed. Endorsement was really about more that general idea that these are the right priorities. We've identified the right enabling strategies for curriculum renewal, and that will be the foundation for moving forward in phase 2. So Matthew also mentioned a couple of things in the chat if people want to look at that in terms of restructuring around competency-based education. Doug and I would love to hear more about that, Matthew. So if you have any words of wisdom, fire it away for sure. I actually met with our new lead for ethics, who's forming a working group and mentioned patients within that and workshops. So that's great. So thank you. Yeah, so Louise asked about how will faculty of medicine work with other faculties or community partners to integrate IP in phase 2. That was certainly a significant part of both IPE and SIM. Lena and Laura Muldoon and I chatted briefly about that earlier today. In terms of thinking about broad representation from the community partners, because the community service learning program will be part of the SIM curriculum renewal strategies. And there were at least 5, if not 6 recommendations from social accountability around community service learning, making that more longitudinal, et cetera. So that will definitely be considered for sure. And I totally agree. Scheduling is like the, probably the most difficult thing to think about, and we're trying to think about what do we really want to teach, how do we want to teach it, and we'll figure out how to build it into a schedule. I think that's why the big structural change, and which will be reflected in the schedule, is likely to be starting in 2023. So it gives us a bit more time to think about that thoughtful integration into a schedule, especially for the first 2 years of our current curriculum. Fantastic comments and perspectives. This is always great to have so many people, where I may not be able to, no one person or small group can actually think about it from as broad a perspective as this. So it's always appreciated for people to share. Well, we're over time. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, but there's one more slide, and then I'll let you go, which is the last slide. Which is, is to express to you, but if you can just move it to that final one, is just to again to express to each of you our profound thanks for your willingness to engage and to participate. We certainly couldn't have done phase 1 with the rigor and the thoughtfulness and the evidence that you considered and the recommendations you created without each of you. There is a letter of thanks coming. We've committed to writing a letter and we hope to address it to the right person, that you would have identified for us, that's specific to the working group that you were a member of, and some of you participated in more than one. And if you certainly would like, we'd certainly like you to continue to remain involved and help, and to make sure that we are creating a space for you to continue to be involved. If you're interested in, certainly let us know. We want to make sure that you remain engaged and updated as we continue to progress. So we'll certainly be holding more town halls and using a variety of other mechanisms, including social media, our website, and others to communicate out what's going on. It's an exciting time for us, but I just wanted to end by expressing our profound thanks to each of you for the time and effort, and in the midst of a pandemic, with all the stresses in your personal and professional life, this was exemplary work, and so thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks. We couldn't have got this far without you, and I appreciate your time and your willingness to share your thoughts and ideas, questions and concerns. with us. It's been amazing. So I hope you have a great evening. I wish you all remain well. And thank you again for taking time out of your life to be with us today. We wanted to do this first with you before we do it elsewhere. So thanks again. Hope you all have a great evening, and thanks for coming again. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.